if I said railways to you, well, what are your first thoughts on our railway system and railway policy? What would you like to see? What needs to change?
Well, I would like to see greater capacity. I would certainly like to see the north and east of the county of Cambridgeshire connected up better to the railway network to open out the Cambridge travel to work area to a wide percentage of people in this county, so that economic uplift that Cambridge is bringing can be shared by more people. I suppose the other thing...
People having a very different type of life, commuting in from 20-30 miles away to people living in the city, living and working...
Well, it's already happening, isn't it? A huge proportion of the working population of Cambridge cannot afford to live in Cambridge. And that's just not just the low-paid people, but people on middle incomes, even quite high incomes, if they haven't, had family money behind them to buy property.
So do you see that as an alternative to building more in Cambridge? So rather than sort of increase the sprawl of new builds around Cambridge, you would rather have a railway connecting up Chatteris with Beach and letting people commute in from...
Well, I mean, I don't think that's an either or. I mean, the green belt around Cambridge is quite tight, isn't it? And there's not that much land within Cambridge. An awful lot of flats.
Northstowe is a huge space. Campbell could double in size if it's...
outside Cambridge. But the population of Cambridge is under kind of huge pressure. What I think is we need to change the social housing policy in Cambridge to have a presumption in favour of people with long-standing community links. I think that deserves to be a component of the social housing point system, because I think the people I grew up with, some of whom I was at secondary school with or primary school with, can't afford to live in the city in which they were born. And I think that undermines the community spirit of any place. And Cambridge is obviously, it's fantastic what's happened economically, but there are many people who...
community link, would it just be going to school in a place? And so someone goes
to school
here and then goes away to university, perhaps takes a first job somewhere else, should they have a sort of right to return to Cambridge?
Well, I mean, the detail I think can be left to local authorities, but as a principle, and I think one or two Labour authorities have started pondering this. From recollection, perhaps Manchester, but you have to check that. The actual...
If you want it myself,
sure.
The town where I grew up, I think has such a policy to try and, for some reason, I would have been able to get preferential, cheaper accommodation there, but I haven't been there since I was 18.
Right.
So why should I have a particular right over housing over other people? It's just something I've experienced. It's a bit of an odd way to...
All parties say they favour strong communities, but if you have too much churn of population and too much transience, you lose that kind of social fabric and social glue. And I think many people who were born in Cambridge have had to move out because they can't afford to live there. There are many families with grown-up children still crammed in the box bedroom, even though they're working. And there are many jobs in Cambridge. The average house price now, I think, is over £400,000. It's really, really tough.
I think it's quite a split society, actually, in terms of... Because some people who do grow up and stay somewhere throughout their life. I think for a lot of people, if you're going to go away to university and try and find a graduate job, you've actually got to be really flexible where you're going to work, not just within the country, but maybe leaving around the world in other countries. If you want to pursue a career, you've got to move around.
Moving around is good if you want to do it, but there's also, it's not a bad thing to grow up in a neighbourhood, knowing lots of people, feeling at home there, and to want to stay there. And I think it's a very great shame. And we were talking originally about the number of people who have to commute in from a distance, perhaps from the north of the county, who would really like to be, living around the corner from their mum in Cambridge. And again, when I was growing up on some of the council estates, you would find extended families, cousins and siblings, and more of a community spirit than exists now. So I do think it's important and legitimate for people who are from an area to have some kind of points bonus priority when it comes to the allocation of social housing. Not the only factor that's considered, but a factor.
So this is really about wealthy people pushing out poor people of expensive places like parts of central London and parts
What's
of
the situation that exists now?
The problem that you're trying to solve here it's so I'm just thinking that it might be really quite impactful in parts of central London, which are where housing is becoming more expensive, and people. It's quite a dramatic policy if you would be successful.
Well, we're the party which is prepared in moderate terms to put the British people first, and we're not ashamed to say that. So
but this isn't about British people first. So this is about basically allowing poorer people to stay in places they would not be able to otherwise afford.
Well, people like who've got long-standing connections with places. It's about allowing them a better chance of staying in the communities in which they have their social lives.
Right, so on railways, very briefly, I know we're going to stop in a moment, but what fraction of the cost of running the railway should be covered by fare payers versus the government? What way do you think that line should be drawn?
Well, it should be shared. I don't think
so it's somewhere shared, but
and at the moment, there are quite a few £1 billion a year that go to the operators, aren't there? And there are big questions about value for money. I think overall in the last 15 years, rail usage has gone up enormously, and I travel on a lot of trains, and I really love trains, but we need bigger trains. That's clearly true.
And so, who would you like to see running rails? Should it be private companies? Should it be public, or should it be somewhere in between?
I mean, that's a really vexed issue, because rail. Some parts of the rail are a natural monopoly, aren't they? In which case, it's very hard. Well, the infrastructure, yeah. So it's very hard to get the consumers a good deal in the private sector in terms of the infrastructure. It's even quite difficult to get proper competition among operators. I don't think there's an ideal solution, because I don't think the days of British Rail were notably halcyon days either, and I think people are always going to grumble about
so
their rail.
So it sounds like you don't have a big objection to the current arrangements, really. Network Rail is essentially public now, and we've got some private operators.
Well, I do think that there must be room to try and get better value for money from the private operators. I don't have a kind of ideological line in the sand, but neither would I be averse to going back to more public operators if that proved to be better value for money.